Good morning, and welcome to this Wednesday Pause for Thought by Father David. Many priests will tell you that their vocation was inspired and encouraged by another priest. And it's also true that when ordained, clergy will find further inspiration and encouragement through their theological and spiritual reading. One particular theological work that has been a great influence on me is a book entitled The Stature of Waiting by William Vanston. Vanston was one of the most distinguished Anglican priests of his generation, working as a faithful parish priest in the northwest of England until 1978, when he became a canon residentiary at Chester Cathedral. He was in many ways very conservative, and was fiercely opposed to many of the liturgical changes that were taking place in the Church of England, influenced by the Second Vatican Council. However, his undoubted theological and devotional abilities shine through in his sermons, retreat addresses, and his books, one of which was The Stature of Waiting, published in 1982, and which I think has something to say to us in the current situation we're having to face. It's not an easy read, but is profound in its message. Vanston begins by focusing on the crucial moment in Jesus' life when he's betrayed by Judas. When Jesus is arrested and handed over to the Jewish authorities and Pilate, this is the moment when the status of Jesus changes. Up until then, he has been a person of activity, travelling, preaching, teaching, and healing. When he is handed over to the authorities, he becomes a passive person to whom things are done as he awaits his suffering and death. Jesus could appear as a tragic figure waiting for his fate to unfold, but this is not the case. Vanston reminds us of how in our own lives we are often forced to change gear from being active to becoming passive. Sudden illness, unemployment, retirement, and old age. We might well add to that list our current enforced lockdown when we are being forced to wait. What Vanston is at pains to point out is that our dignity as human beings is not diminished by periods of forced inactivity, as indeed it was not for Jesus as he awaited his passion. Waiting can be an intense human experience, as I guess it is for many people at the present time. And what Vanston invites us to consider is whether or not there is meaning and purpose in that waiting, whatever form it may take. When Jesus' status changes in his being handed over to the Jewish authorities and Pilate, he is not a tragic figure awaiting his passion. He appears as a person of dignity and stature, because as he undergoes his passion, he is resolute in his loving, never once flinching from reflecting the perfect love of God. Yes, he is also a vulnerable human being because of what is going to be done to him, but he nevertheless stands before his accusers, embodying in his very being as a person the love of God and his perfect trust in God. So what of us in lockdown? What of us whose lives of activity and busyness have suddenly been brought to a halt? What of us as we wait for those of us who are dependent on others for practical support? What of us who wait for an end to our forced inactivity? No doubt many of us have our anxieties and fears. We will have our good days and bad days. Perhaps financial worries, our longing to be reunited with family members and friends. Those who are lonely and isolated and wondering how much longer they can cope. All those and many more emotions are quite natural, for we are human and vulnerable. What sustained the vulnerable Jesus in his waiting was his unfailing trust in and love of God. And in this Easter season we know that it was that love of God which carried Jesus through his suffering and death to the new life and hope of the resurrection. so it will be for us as we hold on to the love of God, that we will have the hope of new life in the days to come. And by way of a postscript to this pause for thought, I know at St. Peter's there are several people waiting with eager anticipation for a decent cup of coffee at Fred and Ginger's.